All right, so hi everyone, my name is Erin Smallwood. I'm here on behalf of the Science Department over at Delaware Tech. And before jumping into our presentation today, I just wanted to thank you guys for having me, virtually of course, considering everything going on with COVID-19. But I hope that I'm able to help you guys learn a little bit about the male and female sexual anatomies today, as well as how both genders respond in sexual situations. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and get started. So, the first thing we're going to discuss today is the science of human sexuality. Now, what exactly is the science of human sexuality, you may be asking yourself? And according to your textbooks by Yarber and Sayad, it is the study of sexuality in humans and beyond. So, of course, you know that includes things like sex, penises, vaginas, and how they all kind of correlate together. But it also covers a large range of other topics as well, like taboos, which are prohibited subjects, prejudices or negative assumptions about it, cultures and how it influences human sexuality, and the fears and hypocrisy that surround it. So moving on to the researchers of human sexuality, which are known as the sexologists. They are often referred to simply as just sex researchers. However, your textbook defines them as specialists in the study of human sexuality. So what exactly do they do? To conduct their research, they perform clinicals, they give surveys and questionnaires, they carry out observations, and they run tests and experiments. The science of human sexuality differs drastically from other sciences, though, because it faces more ethical concerns. You most certainly wouldn't be able to use the same experimental guidelines as other sciences because human sexuality is a super touchy subject. No pun intended there. But because of this, researchers have faced a lot of limitations when it comes to the human sexuality research. But nonetheless, the sexologists have made a really great amount of advancement so far in their research. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and jump on into the male and female sexual anatomies. We are going to be starting with the female first, but just wanted to kind of give you a basic picture here of what to expect. So we do have the male sexual anatomy over here, and then we have the female sexual anatomy, both the internal as well as the external. Alrighty, so right here we do have a diagram of the internal anatomy of a female. It actually does show the reproductive system of the female as well. And we're going to go ahead and start up here at the top left with the fallopian tubes. See that structure right here, but we also have a fallopian tube over here as well. They are also very commonly referred to as uterine tubes, also oviducts. But there are two of them. There's one right here and one right here. Both of them are about 4 inches long, and their function is to transport an oocyte, which is a gamete or sex cell, from the ovary to the uterus. So basically, from the ovary over here, they will send that little gamete through here right into the uterus. Right, so from what we've learned about the fallopian tubes, we know that the ovary is in charge of producing the gametes, and they are these little organs down here. And just like the fallopian tubes, there are two of the ovaries. We have one on each side. And actually, a little fun fact about the ovaries and the fallopian tubes is that even though they appear to be connected right here at this little point, they're actually not touching each other at all. And this is where the fimbria right here will come into play. So very similar to the fallopian tubes and the ovaries, there are two sets of fimbrias. There is one little one over here on this side, and there should be one right over here on this side right here. And they drape over top of the ovaries, kind of in little finger-like structures, and they have little hair-like structures on them as well that wave and they move, and those are called cilia. Now, think of a fimbria as like a hand because its main function is to help the gametes that the ovaries produce to move into the fallopian tubes. So the little gametes that are produced within the ovary right here will come out, and the fimbria is going to use its little cilia and its structure to move those gametes into the fallopian tube, and then just like earlier, right into the uterus down here. So now that we've got a pretty good idea of what all this stuff going on up here is, we're going to go ahead and move downward, starting right here with the uterus. And the uterus is essentially pretty much just this really big organ right here. Its primary purpose is to house a growing baby. You've probably heard it be called the womb before. And then as we move down right here, this little slightly darker pink segment right here is the endometrium. And that is the inner lining of the uterus. It's actually made up of blood vessels that either will shed when a woman gets her period. So this endometrium lining right here is either going to shed and then go down here, or if in the event that a woman does get pregnant, they will stay to nourish that embedded embryo, because when the sperm and egg cells come together, they will embed themselves within the endometrium. All right, and then the myometrium down here, which is this lighter pink shade right here, is the middle layer of the uterus, and it's basically like a support muscle. It also produces contractions when a pregnant woman is going through labor. I also believe similarly that it's the same muscle that performs contractions when a woman is going through an orgasm, but similarly when a woman is about to give birth to a baby, that's where the contractions come from, is the myometrium. All right, and then the cervix right here is the opening between the uterus and the vagina. When a woman is experiencing their menstrual cycle, their period, that shedded lining from the endometrium actually comes through here, like I mentioned earlier. And then if a woman is actually pregnant, the cervix right here will actually dilate or become a little bit bigger so that the baby can fit through during birth, which is a really cool thing that the female body is able to do. And then finally, we have reached the bottom here where the vagina is. This is otherwise known as the birth canal because that's where a baby will typically pass through at birth. The vagina also has menstrual flow pass through there as well. And then, of course, the vagina is the place where reproduction basically begins when a man expels his semen into the vagina, and then all of the other little functions of everything else kind of comes together to create a baby. And before we move on to the external diagram of the female sexual anatomy, the vagina also serves as the opening to the outside or the external anatomy of a female. So let's just go ahead and move on to that, which you can see right here. We're going to go ahead and enlarge that so we can see it a little better. And the vagina opening is right about here, and that's just kind of from the internal perspective right on into the outside, and that's where the vagina opening is, right about there. All right, and then moving on over here to the hymen, it's basically just a thin membrane that's also made up of blood vessels, very similarly to how the endometrium was, and this often will stretch or tear the first time that a female has sexual intercourse. But it's not limited to just that, it can happen from inserting a tampon or something else like that. But otherwise, the hymen doesn't really have a specific function. It's just kind of there to be there. It does let, menstrual flow come through and other liquids and such. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to the perineum, which is right here. It is this little spot between the vaginal opening as well as the anus, and just like the hymen, the perineum doesn't really serve any kind of specific, purpose other than it's just kind of where the spot is that separates the opening of the vagina to the anus. And of course, at the very bottom here, we do have the anus, and it's basically just the opening to the rectum and also where waste will pass out of the body. And then we're just going to go ahead and move up here to the labia minora and the labia majora, which surround the vaginal opening. Now, the labia minora and the labia majora are basically just the inner and outer lips that will protect the clitoris and the vaginal opening. This one right here is the labia minora, and these are the inner lips, and they pretty much form the clitoral hood, which is up here, and then you have the labia majora, which are these outer lips around here, start up closer to where the mons pubis is, and then will come all the way down here. Alrighty, and then right above the opening to the vagina is the urethra, or the urethral opening. This is where urine is expelled from the body, and then right above that is the clitoris up here. And this is basically just the center of sexual arousal in women because it has a large amount of sensory nerve endings. this is pretty much just the only function of the clitoris, really, is for sexual arousal in women, and that's kind of it. Now we have finally made our way to the top of the external anatomy, and it ends here with the mons pubis. It is basically just composed of fatty tissue, and it acts like a shield to protect the pubic bone that's inside and underneath of this little spot right here. And that basically just concludes the female sexual anatomy, both internally and externally. Now we're going to go ahead and take a look at the male sexual anatomy. There's only one diagram that we have to look here. Luckily, I was able to find one that actually had the external and the internal anatomy present in one picture. Unfortunately, it is showing from one side to the other, so bear with me, but we're going to go ahead and start with the bladder. It's just this big organ that's up here. It pretty much serves as a storage facility for urine before it gets expelled through the urethra and then outside of the penis. And then it's not actually labeled on here, but the penis is pretty much just this entire little external organ right here. And it is made up of a couple different things, but we will get onto that in a little bit. We're going to move on to the pubic bone. That is this structure right here. We briefly talked about that in females in the previous diagram, but we can actually see a good picture of it right here. Pretty much its main function is to just provide support, especially for the abdominal structure in males. And then we're going to go ahead and move on down here to the urethra, which you can see spans throughout the penis and then inside all the way up to the bladder. Like the urethra in women, this is just where urine gets expelled from the body. And from the side view, moving down to the testes, we are able to only see one, but there is two testes, or often referred to as testicles, and their job is to produce sperm and hormones. The testes are an average of about 1.5 inches long, about 1 inch in diameter. And now we're going to go ahead and move on to the penis, and like I said, this organ right here, basically this part right here on the outside is known as the shaft. But then looking right here, we have the glans, which is essentially just the head of the penis. And very similarly to how the clitoris works in females, this is a spot for sexual arousal in men as well, because there are a lot of nerve endings on the head of the penis as well. Alrighty, so going on back to the internal structures. Up here we've got the seminal vesicle. There's actually two of these as well. They are glands that sit just right behind the bladder right here. And they secrete a fluid that will make up about 60% of seminal fluid. And right below the bladder down here is the prostate. And very similarly to how the seminal vesicles are, the prostate will also secrete a fluid that makes up about 30 to 35% of the seminal fluid. And then right below that, we have the bulbourethral, which is also known as the Cowper's gland. And in the same process as the other two, but it also will secrete a very thick mucus before a male reaches orgasm. And then this little thin tube right here is known as the vas deferens that extends from the testes to the urethra, and this is basically how sperm is transported, so that when all of these secretions from the seminal vesicles, prostate, and the bulbourethral gland come together, it kind of makes up what is the seminal fluid. And yeah, moving on down here to the epididymis. This is basically the section within the testes where non-mature sperm will mature within here. And then finally, over here we've got the anus. Serves as the same purpose as a female, and it just discretes waste. All right, so moving forward, we're going to briefly discuss two very well-known researchers in the area of sexual response. That is William Masters and Virginia Johnson. Now, these two were extremely popular in the 1950s and 60s as they were conducting research about sexual response that had never been done before. It was really, really new to people. And in 1966, they published their findings in a book that they titled Human Sexual Response. And the public went absolutely crazy over it. It was immediately successful. But what they were most known for was their 4-phase model that explained human sexual response in 4 phases, which were excitement, plateau, orgasm, and resolution. Taking a closer look